You know what's funny to me? I'm 28. When I was coming into journalism, I was like 20. The One of the biggest talking points is that, oh, the right is bad at media.
Yeah, right.
And now, almost a decade later, it's like, oh, the right figured out how to do YouTube. The right figured out how to get to kids on TikTok. How do you balance those two?
I
Having existed in the space during that same timeline.
I remember having the exact same experience as you. Back in like the Tea Party days, if you had told anyone at like CPAC 2012 that within 15 years the right would not just command the momentum in media but also in art, jaws on the floor, except for the boomers who were like selling their like weird portraits of Ben Carson. Everyone else would have been like, no way. The boomers would have been like, oh yeah, we got this, we're bringing art back to the conservative movement. And of course they were wrong in what kind of art was going to come back, but it's totally unthinkable. The only reason it happened is because Donald Trump forced the right to be more, I guess, to be looser, you know? And when that happened, all the doors flung open. I don't know how long it lasts because it's countercultural right now. And so anyone who's in the art world will attach themselves to the counterculture. They're already attached to the counterculture. I mean, I remember back in like several years ago, I was on the set of a Daily Wire movie, and just talking to some of the people who got involved in the project, they weren't making a bunch of money, but they were people who had been around Hollywood, like as grips and sound people and makeup people for years. And just to be involved with that project, they were willing to like relocate for, not a lot of pay because they were so desperate to like just do something with their hands and their skills. And when the door opened up, man, it just was like an explosion.
How would you define counterculture today?
The dominant culture, and this is changing literally as we talk, but the dominant culture, from let's actually start it with Obama. I would say the dominant culture from like 2008 to 2024 was the super technocratic, center-left, I would say neoliberal. I think neoliberalism folded a lot of these like cultural, progressive, managerial class ideas into its imperialism and like crony capitalism. So I think that's been the dominant culture since Obama was first elected, probably especially since the second Obama term, when you had Biden coming out, for example, in favor of gay marriage, huge moment in the culture war. Then the Obergefell decision in 2015. It just felt like the culture had decided this view won. And that's where the counterculture sort of became more reactionary, right reactionary, and that's been pretty interesting.
My observation on that, when I was in school, obviously all things Obama was going on. I went to school in the UK. Half my family lives there. And when I was graduating, like the default settings way of thinking for a journalism grad in Europe was obviously all things Obama, Macron, and that era. And the
Merkel.
Merkel. And the counterculture was Ben Shapiro dunking on college kids on YouTube, or like back then, I don't know, like Milo Yiannopoulos videos. And like that was like, oh, like we would like hide from everybody and like see what's going on. Like that's the counterculture. And the irony there is that those people ended up gaining huge audiences and actually figured out that scaffolding that you mentioned in the beginning. What do you think are the systems in place right now which is propping up this whole industry of online content?
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I don't talk about this a lot. My first job out of college, I worked for a conservative nonprofit called Young America's Foundation. And I'm still involved with YAF in some ways. But what was interesting about the time out of college is that it was I graduated in 2015, and that was, people probably can pinpoint this, when Ben Shapiro started to go stratospheric. His career had been meteoric up until that point. Like he's had so much success already, even at that age. But in 2015, I remember it was after at the University of Missouri, there had been this BLM uprising, because these are the BLM Obama era days when that was becoming a very tense cultural space. And it was just I think they were trying to, I forget exactly what the demands of the BLM protesters at Mizzou were, but they were like kind of funny. They were laughable. Like they're what's now called woke, but it was funny stuff.
Yeah.
And so I remember devising with Ben's team and a lot of people at YAF, like, let's just do an emergency speech let's send Ben Shapiro to Missouri, and it's going to be like an emergency event.
Yeah.
And it started taking off. And then he went to California State University, Los Angeles. And the now you'd call woke protesters, like, they blocked people from getting into the lecture room.
Yeah.
And we did like a live stream from inside the room as kids and Ben were like trapped. And it was, I remember I was like, this is really good content. Yeah. And I didn't, nobody was thinking of the word content at the
back
time.
then. Yeah, no.
But I feel like what happened, and we did this again at DePaul in Chicago.
Yeah.
They didn't want Ben to speak. And so we recorded him. We sent a camera crew.
Yeah.
To record him trying to get into the venue
That's
and being
so
stopped
funny.
by the
It's
police.
so guerrilla.
But it's Ben, right?
Yeah,
like,
no,
it's
yeah,
Ben.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
there's nothing guerrilla about Ben
but-
Shapiro. But because the culture,
Yeah.
the dominant culture, was being so rigid
Yeah.
and politically correct,
Yeah.
Ben was the one that
Rebel.
as
Yeah.
people started to get upset with I think part of it, like, Ben is brilliant. Part of it is like he could have done everything right and still hit a ceiling if the dominant counterculture wasn't so bad. And the reason
Do you think so?
Yeah, I think the
Okay.
proof of that is because it all shattered during COVID.
Yeah.
And I think when people it was exposed for how censorious, like, I don't think if COVID hadn't happened, I don't know that any of this would have really hit the high watermark that it's at now.
Okay, there can be like two reads off that, which is that during COVID, the fact that, people had nothing to do and a lot of content got consumed and people figured out what they actually like. And the second read can be that during COVID, there was this top-down approach
That, I think.
of, shushing whatever isn't the kosher approach, whatever. And you think that's the more viable one?
Yeah, I think it's that. Although I also think it's the democratization of media, meaning that it was easier for Ben to start a media company in the Daily Wire without, all of the traditional infrastructure that you would need, meaning he didn't need to buy like a building in Manhattan to start having mass consumed broadcasts. So I think it's a confluence of those two things. I don't think it was necessarily that people were like stuck at home and watching a bunch of stuff. I think they were pissed that they were stuck at home.
And what? Yeah.
Yeah, if that
That's
makes
such a good way of
sense.
putting it. Because, like, in its sense, like, it was basically talk radio on Facebook.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
yeah, I know, right? So, and obviously now it is way more than that, and they got people like Brett Cooper, so it doesn't just feel like talk radio on Facebook mom content, but it's like basically good content.
But it literally is talk radio on Facebook for like Dan Bongino.
Yeah, basically,
And for Buck
yeah.
Sexton and Clay Travis.
And if you think about it, it's the same audience, by the way.
Yeah. Although you've sort of brought in, it's funny you say that because I was thinking about this recently. You've brought Gen Z into talk radio in a weird way because what talk radio, and Howard Stern is a really good example, used to be was just, I mean, they had commercial breaks, so it was a little different, but like it was one guy in a microphone. And it was them filling that space for hours. And conservatives would always talk about Rush Limbaugh as an artist.
Yeah.
And I think it's performance art, absolutely.
Yeah.
What he was able to do with just a microphone. And so I think there's something to that. It was, what are people like when there's no hair and makeup?
Yeah.
It's just them talking.
Yeah.
That's what I think a lot of talk radio was.
Just to drive that point home, the common saying in TV is that, what's your job, by the way? If you're talking to tell, hey, what's your job? Oh, my job is to fill airways between ad spots, right? Compare that to talk radio, which is you yapping for an hour in someone's ear. And like, that's like the definition of a parasocial relationship. And like today, like people who are like younger or whatever, they're getting that same kind of content, but that format was ironically kind of shaped in that era.
And I grew up outside of Milwaukee, kind of roughly the Milwaukee area. And in terms of conservative talk radio, Milwaukee, oddly, has one of the most robust talk radio cultures in the country. And so it was really common in the area and in the suburbs, especially for blue collar guys, and actually even some people in like cubicles to leave the talk radio stations on all day, and just it was a very passive experience of just you're making dinner or you're changing tires and you're listening to the local. It was literally Charlie Sykes at the time, like was the most popular person in Wisconsin talk radio, and so that I feel like with Gen Z is why talk radio on YouTube, it's sort of similar in the sense that, you know, you've probably seen the reports about Netflix making people write into their scripts like what you're doing at any given moment in a TV show, because people are watching it while they're doing laundry and they want to hear, I am getting up and leaving the room right now, because it helps them follow when they're consuming something. Like, I think it's partially that these old things that used to feel really produced now can feel a lot different. Just because we're just trying to drown ourselves in media.